there, please do subscribe. In today's session, we will be looking at populist authoritarianism in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. We are extremely grateful to our panelists, our scholars, experts, activists, and diplomats who have taken time out of their busy schedules to share their years of work experience with us. Thank you again. That being said, I will give a short introduction to our panelists today. Our lovely moderator is Dr. Nguyen Khan, who is a lecturer at the Erasmus School of History and Culture, Communication, Department of Media and Communication in Rotterdam. Dr. Nguyen holds a PhD in communication studies and possesses a wide range of internet interests, which places emphasis on the importance of public policy, diversity, and corporate responsibility. The themes of Dr. Nguyen's research, to name a few, are neoliberal statecraft, authoritarianism in Vietnam, health communication, and sustainable consumer behavior, with the end goal being to drive positive social change. She has an amazing 13 years experience, not only as an academic, but as a journalist, PR specialist, marketing manager, and marketing director for an array of companies. Our first speaker is Dr. Nguyen Khan Jian. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Apologies if I'm not. Dr. Jian was the former head of political research unit at the Vietnam Institute for Economic and Policy Research, and has academic works in a number of journals, including the Asian Journal of Political Science, Contemporary Southeast Asia, and Constitutional Political Economy, just to name a few. He's also written extensively for English and Vietnamese news outlets. At this point, Dr. Jiang is a research fellow at the Yusof Ishak Institute. His interests include Vietnamese politics, Southeast Asian affairs, authoritarianism, and democratization, society in Asia, and comparative politics. Dr. Jiang holds a PhD from the Victoria University of Wellington. Our second speaker is Dr. Sophia Young, who will speak about political culture, social media, and authoritarian populism in Cambodia. Dr. Young is an expert in Cambodia and a teaching fellow in the Politics and International Relations at Source and Queen's Universities in London. He was a consultant in international development, and his regional expertise shaped his career as an international scholar. He has affiliations with universities in the US, the UK, and Singapore, as well as Thailand, and has graduated from 3 different universities in different countries: Australia, Thailand, and Cambodia. Renowned in this field with many awards and research grants, Dr. Young authored 2 books on authoritarianism in Southeast Asia and political emancipation in Cambodia. Besides the academic career, Dr. Young continued working as a consultant in international development. On to our third speaker, Dr. Phil Wilcox, who has a presentation that reflects on the 48 years of socialism in Laos PDR. Dr. Wilcox is a research associate at the University of Bielefeld in Germany and has a PhD in social anthropology from Goldsmiths University of London. Her most recent research, is entitled One World, One Dream, The Rise of China and Laos, and it aims to document the perceptions of China and Laos through building of the China-Laos Railway and the China's One Belt and Road Initiative. Currently, Dr. Wilcox is in the process of putting together a second book, which looks at the rising levels of Chinese influence and how this influence is perceived and negotiated by the Lao population. Our closing presentation today is presented by Wan Miat, who is a journalist and PhD holder who has written for a number of agencies and researchers in Thailand. In 2013, she co-founded the Human Dignity Film Institute and was the executive director. She also ran the Human Rights Development International Film Festival for 4 years. He produced a few documentary films, but the most outstanding, in my opinion, includes Floating Tomatoes, which is a short but vivid watch that follows a family who live in a river and spend their lives cultivating tomatoes, which shows how they live and survive while explaining the beauties of the unique region. Floating Tomatoes won second prize in the Asian Film of Photos Reporters documentary held in Vietnam in 2010. That's all for our panelists. We have a quick reminder that at the end of the session, we do hold a Q&A. So again, please do hold your questions to the very end. You can put them in the chat box or jot them down right next to you. We really hope you enjoy this panel. I will leave the floor to our moderator, Dr. Nguyen. Take it away. Dr. Nguyen, you're muted at this point. Do you mind unmuting yourself?
All right. So thank you. Thank you for opening the session today and for introducing the panelists. Thank you, the European Center for Populism Studies, for organizing this panelist series. Welcome panelists and the participants. It was a nice surprise when Dr. Bullen Kernes invited me to moderate today's session. My research so far has focused on media studies in Vietnam, and I have touched upon the authoritarian political economy as a contextual factor to understand the media practice. But I only attempted to use the keyword populist or populism once or twice in my writing process. By saying that, I want to acknowledge that I'm not an expert in populism, and I am not going to make an overall assessment of the state of populist authoritarianism in Indochina today, as the agenda ambitiously suggested. I am here today to facilitate the discussion between the panelists and the participants. I think that populism is understood differently by different scholars and paradigms. And like many other concepts in political science, there is no popularly agreed upon definition of populism. I suppose that each of the panelists, they also have their own conceptualization of populist authoritarianism. And even though Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar share many things in common, these countries also have gone through very different trajectories. And because of the different political, economic, cultural, and social settings, populist authoritarianism in each country in China may have different colors. So I hope that the perspective from our presentation and discussion today will provide the audience with more nuanced understanding of where and how each country stands in its political spectrum. So yeah, as has been introduced, we have 5 speakers today, and each of them will spend 15 minutes presenting about an aspect of populist authoritarianism state in a particular country. So the first 1 hour will mainly be for the speaker presentation, and as suggested, we also should type, if you have questions, please type it in the chat box so that the speakers can review your questions and prepare for answer better in the Q&A session. We have more than half an hour for Q&A session. So yeah, I think that we are ready to start. So may I first invite Dr. Nguyễn Khắc Giang, visiting fellow at the Vietnam Study Program, USOP ISOC Institute, to talk about accountability in a high-performing authoritarian regime, the case of Vietnam. Dr. Giang, please.
I'm going to thank for Dr. Khang for very kind introduction, and also Bullen for inviting me to join this very exciting panel, and Neo as well for introducing very excellently about all of our panelists. So my presentation today is very brief attempt to capture a model of high performing authoritarian regime in Vietnam. So it touched a little bit on populism, because as you know, in authoritarian regime like Vietnam, especially one party regimes where you don't really have a lot of competitions, maybe people would believe that probably they don't really need populist ideas, because when you have very strong repressive capacity, you don't really need to convince people about following your ideology or your policy. But the case of Vietnam, and to some extent China, as a high-performing autocracy, I think reflects a very different dynamics of populism, especially in a broader term of accountability. So my presentation today will try to briefly, make sense of this model of authoritarianism in Vietnam. So I'm sharing the screen here, and hopefully you guys will see that. And so my presentation will have 4 brief points. The first one, I will introduce the key concepts of firstly, high-performing autocracy. What does it mean? And secondly, the concept of accountability in authoritarian regimes, because it sounds kind of like very oxymoron things. When you talk about accountability and in an authoritarian regime where actually people don't really need a lot of accountability to maintain power. And third, I will discuss in more detail the Vietnam model of authoritarian resilience. I think it's very important because most of the discussions about authoritarian resilience center around China, which is very unique, which is very 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 different from other autocracies, because China is simply the biggest country in the world with very different cultural values, very different historical development. Vietnam is kind of like more similar to, I think, middle-sized autocracies in the world for us to have a look at. And then I will discuss whether this model of authoritarian regime resilience in Vietnam will be sustainable, and what kind of challenges the regime is facing with, and what kind of implications it might have for the Vietnamese population and the regime in coming time. So the first, high-performing autocracy, and what do I actually mean by that is that when we talk about the East Asia miracle in the 60s, 70s, in the case of Japan and South Korea, and in the 80s, in the case of Singapore, to some extent Thailand and Malaysia, people talk about a very strong state model with which achieve a very sustainably high economic growth over a long period of time. And then because of that, we have an affluent middle class, arising in those authoritarian society. And then we also have very strong state institutions over those society. So it's very different between successful or high-performing autocracy, because there is a very certain level of civil liberty which are allowed in those autocracies. Like in China and Vietnam, we can actually have very good access to the internet like I'm having it now, versus like North Korea, which I would consider as a low-performing autocracy, where you actually cannot have a lot of civil liberties, and you cannot have your voice being heard by specific sections of the political elites. And so accountability in authoritarian regimes, which is closely connected to the high-performing autocracy, because like I said, in high-performing autocracy, because of the sustainably long period of economic growth, the population, a very strong section of the population are affluent. And of course, when they are get richer, there is strong demand for political freedom, and they probably would demand more political rights than when you are poor and you just want to improve your life and earn your living. So in authoritarian regimes like Vietnam and China, there is certain level of accountability, because people would demand more from the state to deliver, not just in terms of redistributive policies, but also in giving their more access to the information, more transparency in terms of state budget, and probably more accountability in terms of the policy decisions, especially in areas such as like land clearance or in taxations, for example. So because of that, we actually have a certain level of accountability in high-performing authoritarian regimes like Vietnam and China. And also, if we look closely at those regimes, we also have a very strong, let's say, check and balance system of internal, accountability system. They also have like parliaments. Within the party, they have the central committees, which are actually kind of like quasi parliamentary systems where all of those members of the party can ask hard questions to their leaders, for example. Some some scholars argue that those are just window dressing. So they just have a picture of democracy, but not actually working as a democracy. But I don't think that explain the checks and balance system in those countries. Despite there is no popular elections, they still have this kind of system where the people inside the party or inside the regime can actually hold their leaders accountable to some extent. And also, like I said, because of the rising wealth in the society, autocratic rulers must find a way to respond to the rising civil society. Like in Vietnam, for example, we have a growing numbers of civil society organizations and civil society activists. Some of them are considered as illegal, but many of them are working within the right of the law. And also we have the rise of independent channels like social media, for example. In Vietnam, we have 60 or 70 million Facebook users out of 100 million people. So it's huge um, internet sphere in Vietnam where it's really hard for the government to actually control all of them. So where, for example, in some cases, like when public officials do something wrong and are captured on camera and they post it online, and this is kind of like kind of like hold the public officials accountable to some extent, which kind of happen, of course, in more repressive and more low performing regimes like, let's say, North Korea. And so why I consider Vietnam as a high performing autocracy? So basically Vietnam during the Cold War was a very poor and very war torn country, and it remained a one party regime, of course. But after the fall of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, Vietnam has transformed from a centralized economy into kind of like market oriented economy, and its economy has been booming uh, extensively for the past 4 decades. And Vietnam, along with China, are among the best performing economies in the world in the past 4 decades. So it's like captured the sustainably high growth economy for quite a long time. And also this has transformed Vietnamese society from very kind of like, I would say, agricultural based economy and society into a more industrialized and more more well-off society where there has been a more diverse sections of population which demand more political rights and more things other than that having a good income or having earn their living now. So it's from a coercion base, from a regime which depended very extensively on coercive capacity, the police and the military to maintain their resilience, their survival. The Vietnamese Communist Party has transformed into something like a performance-based legitimacy. So it's something like a bargain between the population and the regime. So we deliver a good economic growth for sustainably long time, and the population would give away the political wisdom. They agree to be ruled um, in exchange for economic prosperity. So it's a very gradual but very definitive transformation from a coercion-based legitimacy to performance-based legitimacy, and which of course related to our main theme of populism, because when you got into performance-based legitimacy, sometimes you have to convince people that we're actually doing something good, not just depending on your capacity to punish to maintain resilience. So in Vietnam, Vietnam has a system of, I would consider, as a high accountability, because when we consider accountability as the capacity to hold the political elites accountable within themselves, so it's an internal accountability, and the ability of the population to keep the political elites accountable to the society is the external accountability. So if we consider both internal and external accountability, Vietnam is, I would say, considered as within the authoritarian, regime, of course, as high accountability regime. Because in Vietnam, different from China, where you have a centralized rule with Xi Jinping as a supreme leader, Vietnam has a kind of like more collective leadership system where there are four pillars or four strong leaders, which like check and balance themselves in the system. And secondly, inside Vietnam, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, which comprises of 200 members, are behaving similar to a parliament, which kind of hold the political elites, the Politburo of the Communist Party accountable. And so for external accountability, we have more meaningful elections, like here, like the picture here you have seen here in the slide. Uh, there are, in authoritarian regimes, sometimes elections just window dressing. The state gives some numbers, the name of the candidates, and then basically he just win the election without any competition. But in Vietnam, there are some cases where the state mandated candidates were lost in the elections because the population just didn't want that candidate to win. And so we have the budding, development of civil society in Vietnam, especially in areas like environmental activism, labor activism, and youth activism. Of course, there is a caveat. Like I said, accountability in countries like Vietnam, one party with no political competition, does not provide power to choose or remove leaders as it does in democracy. But within the framework of the authoritarianism around the world, comparing with countries like, let's say, China or North Korea, we can consider the authoritarian regime in Vietnam as a high accountability regime. And here is some let's say some graph about the changing of from Vietnam from a low accountability to a high accountability. So basically, in the Central Committee of the Communist Party is the most important political institution in Vietnam. And basically, from the Sixth Congress in 1986, so just before the Cold War, the majority of those of the member of the Central Committee they were from the security and the military, but that number decreased like sharply in 2016, and now the Central Committee is very diverse with members comprising from political leaders, people from the government, people from the mass organizations, and from different spectrum of the political life in Vietnam. The Vietnamese model of authoritarian resilience, like I said, because of the high accountability system in Vietnam, it provides Vietnam with a very unique model of authoritarian resilience. In my opinion, any authoritarian regimes must have very different combinations of state capacity to maintain resilience. They must have like a good extractive capacity because you need money, financial resources to keep the regime going. And secondly, you must have a very good governance capacity where you can, deal with everyday life problems and deal with the popular demands. And importantly, you must have very strong control capacity because without control capacity, you cannot control the population, which is, of course, the most important task of any authoritarian regime. So for Vietnam, thanks to their high accountability regimes, the resources are prioritized to address popular demand because when the population is more when the regime is more accountable to the population, there is the interest of the political leaders in Vietnam to prioritize resource allocation to address popular demand to prevent them from being too angry about the policy. And secondly, because the resources are limited, or when you channel resources to address popular demand, there are less resources for control capacity. So this is a picture about the aftermath of the anti-China protests in Vietnam in 2018, where a policy, where the proposed policy was met with a very angry mobs because they believe that the new proposed policy would give China the right to occupy Vietnam for 99 years. Of course, this is the wrong narrative, but anyway, because of that, there were huge protests across Vietnam, and the government took a really long time to address this. And after three days of deliberation, they give away to the demand made by protesters, and they defer the proposed policy like indefinitely, despite the fact that all the top leaders agree to this policy. Also, because of the high accountability in Vietnam, this allows the Vietnamese government to make a shift away from the domain to tax state model. This is very important because in authoritarian regimes, we have, when you have low accountability, which means low representation. And of course, we all know that there is no taxation without representation. So a lot of authoritarian regimes survive thanks to, firstly, maybe because of natural resources, like oil extraction, or they survive like China. They depends a lot on state-owned enterprises revenue to fund the government projects. But in Vietnam, because of the changing from the low accountability to a high accountability regime, with a more, let's say, more acceptance from the population um, to the regime's legitimacy, they are more willing to pay tax. And so this allows the Vietnamese government to tax more and using this tax, to support their regime resilience. So here a graph which show the revenue shares from state-owned enterprises, oil export, and personal income tax in Vietnam. And we have seen, the big drops from revenue shares from state-owned enterprises and oil revenue in Vietnam, and the increase in tax from personal income tax. So this kind of, like, I would say, a feedback loop, which make Vietnam move more, definitively toward a more, accountability regime, because when people pay more tax and they feel the need to hold the government accountable because they pay money and they want the government to be accountable to their money. Comparing with China, of course, which is very similar to Vietnam, also one party and communist regime, we see that the revenue from state-owned enterprises in Vietnam only account for 10% of Vietnam's government revenue, while in China it remains more or less around like more than 30% from 2000 until now. So there is a recipe for resilience, like Vietnam. High cost of living model is a tax-based extractive capacity, more expansive government capacity, and a fragmented government control capacity. While in China, we have a low cost of living model with people with the government would use more quasi tax. They pay tax, but they use indirect tax like value-added tax to stay hidden from the people, because when you have personal income tax, you pay like personal income tax like every month. Your money is taken from the government, but when you pay value-added tax when you buy something, you don't really know that. So it's the tax stay hidden and makes the connection between accountability and taxation is less visible, and that's a way that China maintain their revenue generation way. So here is some example of the different ways in which communist regimes in China and Vietnam respond to their, let's say, regime threatening events. Like probably you have seen all the umbrellas. This is of course the Hong Kong protest in China, which has sometimes like more than 50% of Hong Kong people on the street. But it was met with very strong repressive forces from the Chinese government, and is just being dispersed by the Chinese Communist Party. But in Vietnam, on the other hand, the many protests are repressed and deal with coercive capacity. But the major protests, with let's say tens of thousands of people, like the labor protests against the changing the social security law in 2015, the anti-China protests in 2018, were normally met with concession from the Vietnamese government, because they are more accommodating to the public demand, and they are more concerning about using coercive force to the population. All right, I think I'm running out of time, but I will try to keep it brief. So there is, of course, when you talk about authoritarian resilience, there are problems, and with low accountability regimes like China also have problems because when you cannot raise taxes because you want the taxes stay hidden, it's very hard for you to find a sustainable source of revenue because like in most developed countries, I would say the majority of the government revenue come from personal income tax. In China, it's only I think account for like 2 or 3% of the revenue of the government. In Vietnam, is 7 to 8%, and it's increasingly becoming a very important part of the income generation of the government. And of course, there would be a power sharing problem because there are bad emperor problem. Um, you have a good, when you have a good, dictator, you might see a very strong period of economic growth and prosperity and stability. But when you have a bad leader, it's very hard for you to remove them. Whereas in countries where collective leadership system prevails, like Vietnam, other leaders can work together to remove a bad emperors. So in Vietnam, the normally there is a term limits, and it's very hard for some leaders to remove that term limits. In high accountability regimes, also financial pressures, of course, because when you try to accommodate to popular demand, it's very hard for you to focus your capacity to deal with specific problems. In China, the government can optimize investment into some areas. You can just ignore popular demand from other places. But in Vietnam, because of this policy of accommodating to popular demand, the financial resources are allocated quite evenly, spread across the country from the mountains, to the countryside with the similar amount of financial allocation, which makes it very hard to focus on efficiency and make it harder for Vietnam to break through into a very developed, innovation-led economy like the government wishes. And also, there's problem like effective control capacity, and which is the most important thing for authoritarian regimes because you cannot just depend on accommodating the popular demand to remain your survival because someday at some point or another because people might want to demand more from you, and at that point you just need to have a coercive capacity to suppress if you want to in order to survive. And because of the financial resources of the government spend too much on other things, it's very hard for them to focus to build an effective control capacity like what you probably have seen in the case of China. It's important to note that because of those problems that I have sketched on in Vietnam high accountability regime, since 2060, there is a new, I would say, potentially a new critical juncture in Vietnamese politics where a very strong conservative party leader, when Phu Chok became, in power, and he think that the system doesn't work, and he tried to consolidate more power into the party conservative in order to build a more kind of like China-like system in a way that the party controls more power and have more ideology-driven approach to development instead of just focusing on performance-based legitimacy. So this leads to the revitalization of ideology in Vietnamese politics and the tightening of political sphere that we have seen since 2016. So this poses a very important question: whether Vietnam will go the way of China to become a more centralized, more low accountability regime, model of authoritarian resilience, or will Vietnam try to be, more accommodating to the populations and become more high accountable? So in a sense, that might even lead to Vietnam's democratization in the future. So I think that's a very important, both academically and practically, to researchers and observers of Vietnamese politics. Many thanks, and hopefully I'm not speaking too much, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyễn Khắc Giang, for a very interesting presentation. And I myself learned a lot of new things today, especially in your comparison between Vietnam and China in their approach to accountability. And I'm sure that the audience will also may have questions and comments for you later on. Next, may I invite Dr. Sophia Young, a teaching fellow on politics and international relations at the Queen Mary University and University of London to talk about authoritarianism in Cambodia. Dr. Sophia Young, please.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, and also thank you, Bulent Khan, and also the organizing team that provide this opportunity for me to talk about my long written papers that I haven't published it yet, but still a work in progress. It has been quite some time now. So thanks a lot for these opportunities. My apology that my camera doesn't work in here. I don't know what's going on in here. Technical problem like that. Yeah. So my talk today will focus on political cultures, social media, and authoritarian populism in Cambodia. So this is mainly based on my observation and also based on the secondary data that I've been tracking the process of how politics and political culture develop in Cambodia like that, and also how the social media has played the role in Cambodia in the eras of digital politics like that. So I tend to argue that while social media play a vital role in democratization process, as you can see in other countries, for example, in Middle East, and also to some extent in Cambodia, but I tend to argue that this is a double-edged sword that we can see in the context of Cambodia and also others developing authoritarianism as well. So it became a tool for surveillance of capitalism. So the digital media is a capitalist approach that used to dominate not only economic but also the way of communication like that. So I argue that the success of like authoritarian populism to some extent in Cambodia is due to their entrenched cultures of believing in rulers like spiritual skillfulness and an ability to rule the country as quite as they could. For those who have not known about Cambodia, so it's a country in Southeast Asia between Vietnam and Thailand and also Laos, part of the Mekong regions. So we have been through different kind of like civil war, genocides, and then after the last 40 years, it has been controlled, and we have our prime minister leadership until recently he transferred the power to his son in a more effective ways in that context. So in this context, we can see that the political culture play very important role as to how the prime minister has been in power more than 20 years, 30 years, something like that. This is the key thing that why he keep doing that, because of his charismatic and also the cultures that have been playing very important in this context like that. But before I unpack any others context in here, I just want to highlight some key context that of populism, what does it mean in here, and especially in the context of Cambodia as well. As Dr. Khan have mentioned before, so the populism and also authoritarianism has been a very complex concept, and the conceptualization of like populism tend to center on the criticism of others, and also another term we call like anti-pluralism, and also the claim of being the sole representative of the constituents like that. So that means any person, any politician that tend to claim themselves as the only legitimate leaders, and also the only person who can address any problem is the populist. So but I acknowledge that there are many definitions of populism, saying, for example, in the past 10 years with Trump, so we can Trump is populism, and others can have Some people would say right-wing and left-wing populism in that context. So in this context, being populism politician is not only that they side away different other people, but they also claim that they themselves actually a nationalist, the person who actually caring about their country, caring about their people, and also their sovereignty as well. So in that context, we can consider as a populism like that. So this notion of populism actually collaborate align with the notion of like electoral authoritarianism, or to some extent you would say that the hybrid regimes in which the ruler has transformed themselves into populists and acting as the only legitimate representative of the nation. The rulers in this regime develop themselves to populists in order to justify by using what is called like democratic means, for example, election, or justify the democratic shortcoming, saying that using the electoral mean as a way to achieve their powers and being the only person who actually recognized it or voted by their constituent like that. So they eventually claim that populism is the ruler or any executive that actually stabilize the regime by maintaining their coalition with different other political elites like that. So we can see that these two contexts linking together, authoritarianism and also populism. So people tend to call it like authoritarian populism. So the authoritarian populism call for a strong state that has mentioned by previous speakers like that, and also the social disciplines that linking to understanding how the use of measures, repressive, or to some extent concessive approach that can have a strong impact on how the state capacity are being built and also how the state are playing the role as well. So it aims not only to control but also to censor dissidents, citizen or any opponent, or can say for example opposition parties or any other opponent, including civil society that mentioned by our previous speaker as well. So the ultimate aim is that to cultivate what is called like legitimate powers. To this end, so the populism approach is to associate with some sort of like mass electoral politics. So mass electoral politics in here, we can say similarly to the case of the US, where Trump using his rhetoric approach of mass electoral politics to mobilize the electoral support for him to win the election and to claim the powers. So by disseminating what called political ideologies, mostly on the right-wing belief, saying that to invoke electoral support in this context. So this can be achieved by different other technology that actually bless how the populism are working, because the populism is not the new term that actually emerged during the social medias or digital popularity in here. So social media adding that kind of like platform that allow the populist politician or actors to articulate their political ideologies and also to spread their campaigns and message to the target audience, especially the constituents like that. So in this context, we would claim that populism is still complex, but the key aspect here is about sovereignties and about anti-pluralisms, and also the claim that as a legitimate person who can solely or only person who can lead the country and also address the country as well. And on this context, it became a nationalism perspective, saying that they are the only person who actually behave as a nationalist like that. So in a context of Cambodia, we have seen how the social media has played a very important role. So in 2013, we see a change of election where the opposition party gained significant popularity compared to the ruling party like that. And that was actually supported by the use of social media to mobilize the constituents or the youth who had actually play a very important role as well in changing the election outcome like that in the country. So in 2013, the social media is starting to emerge in Cambodia. Not many people have used it. Around like 6 or 7 million people use the Facebook, for example, as one of the key players. While the opposition leader were actually banned before 2019 from entering the country, so he used social media to connect with the constituent in the country and then mobilize support. So in 2013 election become surprise that the ruling party achieved still win the election, but lost a majority of the support to the opposition party. So in Cambodia, if you have not known, so Cambodia has about so far 17 million, but in 2013 it's about 16 million, 15 millions like that. But if you look at the data, for example, the mobile phone users in Cambodia, so at least each Cambodian own at least two mobile phones or two SIM card in that context. So the user of the mobile phone up to early 2020 actually 21 million something compared to 16, 17 million. So that means a lot of people are using two phone like that. And the access to the internet in Cambodia was quite the coverage is quite at least 80% of the entire country can access to mobile internet in that sense. So by understanding how media has been playing an important role to suppose or to avoid some sort of like what they call conventional media that actually controlled by political elite, something like that. So social media allow people to use the platform to access to information, even though there's some issue in terms of like fake as well as the any real content of the news medias like that, but it's still very helpful like that. So knowing that, so the Prime Minister Hun Sen actually starting to use Facebook in 2013, if I'm not wrong, and then he asked all his followers to follow what he has been using the Facebook to communicate with different electorate and also the citizen of Cambodia like that. So within a year or two, something like that, so he could actually mobilize paid followers and like up to 16, 13 million like that. So while recently Cambodian user of the Facebook is about 11.75 million users, so that means his popularity is not only in the country of Cambodia as a user, but also from the rest of the world, and also in the region as well. But many people accuse that page being they bought their like the follower from other country. So that is another story that have been arguing by the opposition party. So the opposition party claimed that that is the reason. And then the Prime Minister claimed that his follower actually supports the number of followers by the main opposition party, especially Mr. Sam Rainsy. So Mr. Prime Minister got around 4 to 5 million followers. In the meantime, the Prime Minister then got like 13 followers at a time. So this give him a lot of leverage, saying that he is the only popular in a country like that. So he even claimed that he was the king of Facebook, he's the king of social media, and now he uses social media and smartphone technologies like that with the followers like that. So all the subordinate institutions were asked actually to follow his page, and also asked that if any citizen has any problem, and they can also report to the Facebook through comment and anything like that, and ask all the subordinate institutions, especially Prime Minister, department, and any sectoral in charge of any issue to follow on the Facebook. If anyone file complaint through comment and anything like that, that institution need to address the problem. Otherwise, it would face some sort of consequence like that. So through this kind of like cultivation of popularity, so we can claim that only the existing mechanism of filing complaint about any irregularity about social economic issue of the people now being centralized to the Facebook Prime Minister. So, and that as a way to claim that how he is the only leader that addressed the problem to all of the citizens. So through this process in Cambodian cultures, you believe that anyone who actually address your problem, you tend to feel gratitude to what you have done. And that is the process how culture are playing. The only man who can address the problem, because the prime minister is one of the hero that actually support the liberation of the Khmer through in Cambodia that end the genocide regime that killed about 2.5 million people like that. So this became of like a rhetoric that been using to provide a political narrative saying that he has some sort of charisma and also skillful leaders and also how to address the problem through different places. So then the people believe this is the way. And then in 2018 election, so it became clear that the ruling party led by the Prime Minister Hun Sen won the majority of elections like that. And that this is how the way the Facebook has been using to cultivate that kind of charismatic and also popularity from the populism perspective that I mentioned about, saying that the only prime minister to has legitimacy in terms of supporting any others issue or any social economic problem in the countries like that. So in this context, I would say that uh, the social media provides some sort of platform of political participation, but it is also a place where you can also become vulnerable as well when it comes to surveillance being controlled by different, because whenever you post something on Facebook, that means it is out of your own boundary. That means it become a public boundary, even though it is what is called like Anderson saying that imagined community. This kind of community can be accessed by different others. So if you have become very critical about things, for example, being activists that quite critical about the government, so when you post on Facebook as a way to advocate, but this can be seen and then it can be tracked that who you are in terms of the social media contact. So we have seen a lot of suppression to any critical activists and also opposition that play a role that tend to what it is called like to create some sort of like interruption and also turmoils in the countries like that. So we have seen this kind of like thing. So while social media play some important role in terms of cultivating and leveraging the impact, it's a positive impact to the community, but they also jeopardize your situation as well, because all your information, data, recognition, anything like that has been put into online that can be accessed by anyone. So one upon a time, long times ago, the Prime Minister said saying that through digital technologies, he can also track and also arrest somebody within a short time period if there anything wrong, if you are criticizing the government without any constructive like that. So I would say that social media is a Western notion that many people believe that social media is a way to of modern democracy like that, given it ability to democratize how the information and news are being accessed by different other users, but it lost control to the context of authoritarian populism in the age of like surveillance capitalism like that. So the authoritarian regime tend to expropriate the Western device like smartphones and social medias actually to circumvent political pluralism, and that will fuel what is kind. We understand that the culture of believing in a strong man. So at the same like you have been using the celebrity, for example, when they become influent, that means people will tend to follow them. Whenever they review some place saying that this is a good place, and then people will go and buy other stuff, anything like that. So when you cultivate the followers in this context, it create a culture of believing that you are the person like that. as you can see, some of the other celebrities saying that they went to a place, then they review a restaurant, for example, and it's good, something like that. But you can't believe whether it's good or not until you go to yourself. But you believe that it's gonna be good, and then but in reality, when you go to that place, then you see that the taste wasn't good. But people tend to follow them before they realize anything happened later on. So I would argue that the social medias have played a potential role to spread the news, and also news is made faster than traditional media, but became a tool of the authors in populism as a way to cultivate populism for the way how the country rule in that context. So I would end my talk here, and I'm looking forward to discuss on this later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sophia Young, for a very interesting story about social media and populism in Cambodia. It's very interesting. I may say we'll have a question later on. Now, may I invite Dr. Phil Wilcox, a research associate at the Bielefeld University, to present on reflecting on 48 years of socialism in the Laos PDR. What does it mean and what comes next? Dr. Phil Wilcox, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to talk about Laos. By my calculation, we're running a little bit behind time, so I will try and be swift. And I imagine I'll be a little bit briefer than the last two speakers. But a special thank you for the invite, but also to the people who've spoken before. It's a lot of food for thought, and I've made a lot of notes as we've been talking. Talking about Laos, this is a particularly serendipitous time, actually, to be talking about Laos and where it is politically, as it celebrated National Day on the 2nd of December, marking 48 years of one-party socialism. And while that anniversary might be quite small, the celebrations marking 50 years of the current political system coming up will almost certainly be spectacular. So in this overview, I want to try to reflect on the journey that's brought us to 48 years of socialism in Laos. This is to say that while the same political system still exists, it has changed shape quite significantly in its history, and I'll try to illustrate here why. And the image on this slide is perhaps quite telling for the journey, the three heroic figures of the Lao Revolution, celebrating the founding of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. We have the mother, the soldier, and the farmer standing on the representation of the capitalist world. What does this all mean for reflecting on the state of authoritarianism, both in Laos and beyond? I'll try and get to that. And I think you'll see some similarities to what we've heard, perhaps particularly in the first presentation, but also some quite profound differences. And I'll try to point out why here. Let me just quickly try to move on. So for people who are already familiar with Laos, feel free to tune out for a minute. But for people who are not, I find this context quite helpful. And there's some important things to point out here. First of all, Laos was defined as a least developed country by the United Nations in 1971, and it remains one of the poorest countries in the world, although, as I'll get to later, it is actually hoping to graduate from being a least developed country in 2026. Development via infrastructure, as we will see later, is regarded as a rapid way to do that. And the important point to take from this now is that most of the population of Laos is living on just a few dollars a day. There is a very small middle class, and inequality is absolutely growing. Most of the population remain in the rural areas, deriving a living as subsistence rice farmers, and the population, around 7 million, concentrated quite unevenly throughout the country, mostly in the areas of the river valleys. Another important thing I need to say about Laos right now, though, is that it is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world, with 50% of the population being from the majority ethnic group, and the remainder made up of ethnic minorities, of which the Khmer and the Hmong are the sizable ones. While the Lao authorities have done really quite well at encouraging school attendance, the ethnic diversity of Laos means that a lot of the population are doing education in a language that is not their own. And a lot of the older generation, such as it exists in Laos, is illiterate. And in the case of the minorities, are not fluent in the Lao language. And because of the way that the politics is done in Laos, interaction with the Lao state is done in the Lao language and only the Lao language, which presents some quite significant challenges for minority citizens. Laos was a French colony until 1953 and then fell into a very protracted state of civil war, which was connected to the conflict in neighboring Vietnam. And obviously this went on for several decades. There's a reason why Laos is often referred to as the land in between space, and also a smaller figure in conflicts perpetuated by more powerful entities. The important thing to state, though, is that the contemporary state of Laos, as I said, was established in December, in this case 1975, which spelled the end of the Lao monarchy and exile of much of the educated population, and now still has quite a large diaspora in countries such as France, Australia, and the US. The political system, as it came in 1975, established Laos as a socialist republic under the guidance of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, and repression of dissenting voices was particularly strong in the early years of the revolution and has continued so today. And another thing just to take from this very sort of big sprint through Lao history is that if we talk about the birth of Laos as in its contemporary form in 75, as many people do, that's all well and good. But Laos is still living with the legacy of the conflict that brought the current political system into place. For example, dealing with huge numbers of unexploded bombs, which were dropped by the US as part of attempts to stop the conflict in Vietnam. Talking about socialism in its first decades in Laos, one important thing to say, because it's very relevant for where Laos is today, is that in 75, the new authorities faced an enormous challenge to unify the country. As you've heard, very ethnically diverse country, they established Lao as a national language over the population. We're talking about somewhere with very limited infrastructure and somewhere which is very, very mountainous, so a lot of remote populations. The collective agriculture system was established shortly after the revolution. It brought relatively few positive benefits to the population and was abandoned in the mid-1980s, where we see a loosening of economic restrictions, very much in line with what was going on in Vietnam at the same time. And perhaps the important point on our journey for where Laos is today is to talk about the 1990s, where I would say the regime reinvented itself and was remarkably successful in doing so. Obviously, at this point, geopolitically, we see the dissolution of the USSR and a large number of formerly communist states becoming post-socialist. But clearly in Laos, China, Vietnam, and elsewhere, this did not happen. And a really important thing to think through is why that didn't happen then and what is keeping that political system in place. We see an enormous reappropriation or reinvention of the system, reappropriation of symbols from the former pre-1975 regime, with the current authorities beginning and still continuing to present themselves as the legitimate guardians of what they consider to be authentic Lao culture. And we see a resurgence of Buddhism and Buddhist practices coming back into the Lao mainstream at around the same time. I would say that the Lao authorities have been remarkably successful in doing this. This is important for their own legitimacy, but has also allowed the regime to shift shape quite significantly. As I say, to take on this role as being the legitimate guardians or legitimate representatives of the Lao population. Laos began to reopen to foreign tourists, foreign businesses progressively from the 1990s onwards. What you've got on the screen is a banner for Visit Laos China Tourism Year 2019, and 2020-24 is designated as another Visit Laos year, where people are encouraged to go and see it. But then we have an interesting question, don't we? If we're saying the country has reopened and the system has reinvented itself, what then can we say about what is Laos politically? And the important point really that I cannot stress enough is that opening the country economically does not mean any loosening of the political landscape. And that's a point we'll see replicated elsewhere. It's really not a simple question of thinking about whether Laos is really socialist or not, or whether it has ever been. Along with Holly Hai, who's written a very interesting book called Project Land, which took this question very much head on. I believe that the Lao political system needs to be understood on its own terms. And we therefore need to ask this question about, what would socialism look like? What do we understand Laos to be? But it is also important to think about where socialism is in the Lao political lexicon, and it is retained as a political end goal, a point that Laos will arrive at someday. It's also important to think about what is keeping the political system in place, and we can't really talk about that without talking about increased close relations with China, both economically and politically. And I'll talk in a minute about the development of infrastructure and the leasing of quite large areas of Lao land to foreign actors within what is presented as a national program of development. At the same time of thinking about where Laos is politically, I'd like to repeat that Laos remains a very poor country with its population living on just a few dollars a day. Is it really going to graduate from least developed country status? That will be a very interesting thing for us to watch in the coming few years. And we also need to talk about what could be termed the authoritarian turn, the retrenchment or increase in authoritarianism in Laos progressively in the last decade. In 2012, Swiss NGO director from Helvetus was expelled from Laos, and one of Laos's most notorious political events, the disappearance of development worker Sombat Sompon, happened at exactly the same time. I'm sorry for the typing error on this slide. This represents a real move towards increased authoritarianism in Laos. I'll say again later that Laos does not have very much meaningful civil society. And what might have started to develop there, what was firmly stamped down on, and that's a point we're still living with today. In the last decade, I would say there has been a massive rise in self-censorship in Laos of people becoming more aware of things that are off limits, which one must not talk about. And this goes in some ways hand in hand with increased internet surveillance. I was very interested in the comments about social media in the last presentation, and it's something very, very important in Laos. This is a country where often government agencies or news websites don't really exist, but those organizations will update information via their Facebook pages, which is why Facebook is so important in Laos. But while internet and digital literacy in Laos, particularly good Wi-Fi, I'm suffering from a lack of good Wi-Fi this morning, is higher in Laos than it is in many European countries, this goes alongside an increased surveillance and definitely an increased awareness of surveillance of what people write on social media. In the last few years, one has needed to register all mobile phone SIM cards, and you must go with your identity documents to an office to do this, which is quite at odds with what happened in the years before, where you could just buy one, put it in your phone, move on with your life. And we're seeing an ongoing repression of political dissidents and also perceived political dissidents in Laos. And Journal Southeast Asian Affairs publishes a yearly summary of events all across Southeast Asia. And this is something that shows up quite repeatedly in the chapters where people look at an overview of what's been happening in Laos. And just as a quick example of a take on where Laos is in terms of who gets to administer justice, lawlessness, and so on. This article by Kieran Sims, which appeared in The Diplomat earlier this year, looked at repression of critics and a sharp decline in public safety. So I put that there as a link that's quite interesting to follow through. There are a couple of really important points though to bring out here. Authoritarianism is nothing new in Laos. It is not the situation that there's been a huge move towards it in the last 10 years, as we see in other places. But what we do see is that the last 10 years in Laos represents an entrenchment of what was already there and a move towards a more hardline form of authoritarianism. As I've said, we've seen a greater control of media and an upsurge in violence or repression of critics or perceived critics. One of the areas where this tends to be particularly acute is to do with concerns or perceived criticisms about direction and the direction of development in Laos. I mentioned earlier about development of infrastructure as a fast-track way for Laos to develop, which has been a keystone of Laos government policy for many years. We've seen hydropower projects, including the one that collapsed several years ago, and most recently the opening of a high-speed rail network between Laos and China. Questions about who benefits from those and adequate or inadequate forms of compensation remain an issue. And there is, of course, no independent oversight of these kind of schemes. I mentioned at the start that Laos is often typified as a country that's between other places. And the Lao authorities are very keen to capitalize on that position. And there's now a move for Laos to pursue a strategy of being not landlocked per se, but land-linked, i.e., attached to other places and being able to sort of capitalize on its geographical location. At the same time, this goes hand in hand with a semi-official government policy of what is called turning land into capital. And that is what I mentioned earlier about the leasing of Lao land to foreign actors in pursuit of gaining revenue, which is in the interest of national development. Laos has seen really serious problems with inflation in the last few years, and it hit 25.2% inflation in November. And this means that while all this is going on, authoritarianism becoming more and more entrenched, we have a lot of the population in Laos who know fine well that corruption is a problem. And they also know that many lose out in these sort of development schemes. But also, we also see people struggling with everyday business of life, particularly in recovery from COVID, inflation, and rising prices. I mentioned earlier that Laos has quite a large overseas diaspora of people who left Laos at the time of the establishment of the Lao PDR. Many of those people dreaming of regime change elsewhere and outside Laos are obviously now quite old. In Laos itself, it's important for me to say that there is some support for the regime as it is, but perhaps even more so, we have seen several generations now of people growing up who've never really known anything different. One could say that in such an ethnically diverse society, there's a fairly weak sense of national identity. That's possibly debatable. But what's not debatable is that the population of Laos is relatively young, and it has very little knowledge or direct knowledge of any other political system. That's not absolute. I would say that people do know that how they are governed is very different from that of, say, neighboring Thailand. And certainly Lao friends are enormously interested when I talk about things like going to vote. It is not the case that these people are completely alienated from the political system. They know quite a lot about voting and are involved with this process, both at village, city, and so on upwards life. And this is an important point actually about how Laos is governed, because it is governed quite effectively from the top right down to things like village committees. And people are involved, but also not involved in this process at the same time. So to tie up, what are we seeing? Well, no loosening, as I've said, of the political landscape. And it's important to as well keep in mind that there's quite a bit about how the Lao political system works that is not very well known by outsiders. That may become clearer in the coming decades. For the Lao authorities, developing the country, but balancing and mitigating the effects of growing Chinese influence and economic problems is likely to be absolutely crucial. I would say that Laos is very likely to be impacted by climate change, not so much as a cause of it, but will disproportionately feel the effects of it. That's absolutely something to watch. But politically, it shows real pragmatism in who is close to the Lao political establishment and the sort of relations that it wants to engender. But whatever else, I would say that political change is very unlikely in the coming few years. I hope I've kept the wrap up short as I was requested to do so. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Finn Wilcox. Talking about Laos, almost half a century within 17 minutes. I think that yeah, it is really challenging. Thank you for a very interesting talk. So next, may I invite Mon Myat, PhD candidate from the Peace Building Program at Phayat University, Thailand, to talk about East Myanmar, a totalitarian state. Mon Myat, please.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm now not a PhD candidate anymore. I'm started teaching at Phayat University. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Let me share my slides here. Today I'd like to talk to you about the question. I want to start with the questions. Call it, is Myanmar a totalitarian state? Let me go back a little bit. Okay, wait a second. Actually, firstly, I would like to say that I'm very honored to take part in this event. And I would like to thank Dr. Bulent Sneaks and European Center for Populism Studies for inviting me to this event. So, as I said in this event, at first I'm going to talk about totalitarianism in Myanmar, and I like to include the case study. So that is why I decided to take the case study and data collection from, one of the Myanmar exile media, Democratic Voice of Burma, and trying to analyze data through that study. And so I'm going to discuss the resilience of Myanmar's independent media under digital totalitarianism, and through the lens of Hannah Arendt, a Holocaust survivor and a German-born American historian and philosopher. Hannah Arendt defined the sine qua non of totalitarianism as dominating and terrorizing human beings from within. In the eyes of the world, Myanmar is a nation where a perpetual internal conflict between pro-democracy and pro-military forces has existed for decades. So the coup of February 2021 is merely the latest iteration of a generation-long conflict. This is a tragically accurate impression. And while the international media focus more on the latest Israeli-Gaza conflict or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it turned a blind eye to the terror tactics of the powerful Myanmar army. Like the Russian army, Myanmar military also conducts airstrikes against civilians, including school children and women. The regime soldiers drive out people from their villages and burn the houses. The regime's tactics include massacres, murder, torture, and summary arrests, engaging in what Hannah Arendt defined dominating and terrorizing human beings from within. If you look at the Press Freedom Index in 2022, Myanmar became one of the world's largest prisons for media professionals after China and Iran. This figure explained that we have about 171 journalists being arrested, among them 114 journalists being released, 53 are staying in the prisons, and 4 died during the coverage or during the interrogation in the prison. And another figure explained that among the journalists detained, 10 are female journalists and the rest are the male journalists. So first, why Myanmar military regime targeting to the independent media? I'd like to, before I go there, I'd like to explain about this picture. This is a picture I took in a place, it's kind of like a very crowded area in Yangon, former capital city of Myanmar. This was the street art created by Myanmar artists with the collaboration with French embassy, if I'm not wrong. Anyway, so this picture became like this after the coup. This very creative art was whitewashed by the regime. So how the regime treated freedom of expression of the people of Myanmar. That's what I like to highlight in this discussion. Why regime targets independent Myanmar media and freedom of expression of people? Because they want to create conspiracy stories, and because they want to control by using those stories. Through those stories, they want to control people through those conspiracy stories. And also the regime wants to create fake news and make people fearful through their fake news and propagandas. And they also want to use social media as a propaganda tool to spread their conspiracy stories and fake news, to make people fearful and to make people believe in their system. And that is why social media surveillance in this time, especially under this newest coup, we find social media surveillance everywhere. Big Brother is watching us every day. Because the regime used social media platform as a great surveillance tool, while media and opposition groups use social media as a place to disseminate news and also use it to express their opinions freely. Although there is no particular censorship system, except for repressive laws against independent media, the regime used social media platform as a tool to monitor all independent news entities and also individuals. Besides, the regime used Facebook, Telegram, and Instagram's account to create fake news and propaganda. So this study examines the reports produced by the fact-check program broadcasted by one of the independent media based in exile, call it Democratic Voice of Burma, a Chiang Mai-based Myanmar independent media group, and find out how the regime used social media platform as its civilian tool and propaganda machine to expand its totalitarian rule. Hannah Arendt's analysis of totalitarianism is developed in her first book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. Arendt's book highlights 4 major elements of totalitarianism: anti-Semitism, propaganda, surveillance, and terror. I would like to use Arendt's lens to study the resilience of Myanmar independent media under digital totalitarianism. First, Arendt's used the scapegoat theory to explain how European nations have historically accused the Jews of various nefarious schemes and plots against Europeans. The scapegoat theory is, of course, not confined to Germany or Europe writ large, but it's operated in many cultures and many countries. For Hitler's soldiers, the mass killing of Jews was considered their duty. Hitler was clear about his intentions, declaring in one of his speeches, "My aim is to make war. We will kill the Jews of Europe." In the cases of Jews, Arendt noted, before becoming the main victim of modern terror, the Jews were the center of Nazi ideology. Here we see parallels between the scapegoating of the Jews by Nazi Germany and the campaigns of Myanmar militaries against foreign settlers, such as Chinese, Indian, Bangladeshi, particularly Rohingya Muslims. The military authority has created a conspiracy story, such as the more Myanmar admits Rohingya Muslims into the country, the greater the threat to the race and religion in Myanmar. So this is the Myanmar regime's policy concerning the Rohingya is almost identical to the Nazi-invented conspiracy story for Jewish people. The recent Rohingya exodus is not the only one in Myanmar's history. After the 1962 military coup in Myanmar, the regime mobilized a massive exodus of Indians and Chinese, approximately 500,000 to 800,000 within 2 years. So Muslim conspiracy story was constructed with the nationalist sentiment molded by 3 characteristics of the majority population, which is called in Burmese Amyo Bada Tadana, race, religion, and Buddhism. So similar to anti-Muslim conspiracy stories, the regime is also using anti-democracy, anti-revolutionary groups. They are making many conspiracy stories on social media, using social media as a platform to spread all these conspiracy stories every day. And also in the Myanmar situation after the coup, the Ministry of Information became a major propaganda machine of the regime. All independent media outlets were forced to shut down. The rest of the media companies are being controlled by the army. International telecommunications companies are being replaced by local business conglomerates affiliated with the Myanmar military. Independent journalists, if not detained, has gone into exile. The military's propaganda machine ran not only in print, radio, and broadcast media, but on different social media platforms. So if you look at these figures, we gather from the data collected by the DVB Media Group. There are more than 300 Facebook pages were created by the proxy military groups, and also more than 600 Telegram accounts and pages were created. And also they use YouTube, VK, Viber, or Twitter, etc. So how they do by using those social media platforms. Take a look at this. These are the individual pages and media monitor every day. They monitor a group of proxy military groups. They monitor individual accounts. And then they also inform the police, and such people are posting anti-military opinions on social media. Then they try to find out the address of this accounts, these people, and then ask the police station, inform the police station to go and arrest. So these are the people being arrested within a day or two after they post something against the military regime, because they are all of our accounts are monitored by the regime. One of my accounts also, I found this one of the proxy military groups used one of my photo and posted, find out her addresses and try to catch her, something like that. So I found this kind of experience on my own. So these are the social media surveillance they are doing every day, and watching not only the media, also individual people who are making noise against the military regime. So the last element is policy of terror. For ardent totalitarian regimes use state-sponsored terror as the counterpart of propaganda. And it is important to note that the states frequently direct terror at the average citizens. If you look at these slides, you will see the terror of Myanmar military soldiers. It was the report broadcasted in Radio Free Asia. The report was made based on the video footage taken by Myanmar soldiers while they were talking about the act of killing and torturing the villagers in Sagai region. More than 30 innocent villagers were tortured and killed in one such incident. There are a series of massacres and terror in different regions, such as Yangon, Mandalay, Karenni, Chin, Sagai, and Magwe after the 1st February coup in 2021. So that's why Arendt finds extermination and total domination as a modern form of tyranny. And UN reports frequently highlights Myanmar military engagement in systematic human rights violation, many amounting to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Security force has shown a flagrant disregard for human life, using airstrikes and heavy weapons on populated areas and deliberately targeting civilians. Amidst all these elements, Myanmar independent media stay resilient and keep their role as a watchdog to monitor the act of military regime. So as conclusion, I will conclude in these slides. The similar to the Jewish conspiracy theory of the 20th century, the Rohingya narrative highlights a 21st century global political context. According to the scapegoat theory, those who want to establish religious extremism and narrow nationalism always target scapegoated group to strengthen their ideology. The ultimate goal behind these scapegoating ideologies is for one man or one group to seize and control absolute power. rejecting democracy and human rights. So similarly, the Tamil hold onto power through conspiracy, propaganda, surveillance, and terror. And until now, Myanmar military rulers continue to terrorize, torture, murder, and rape defenseless citizens. In conclusion, it is crucial to remember Arden's warning that totalitarianism is the only form of government with which coexistence is not possible. So those who hold power in totalitarian states do so in a totalizing fashion, banishing all opposition, dissent, or diversity. Crucially, as she further noted, wherever totalitarianism rose to power, it developed entirely new political institutions and destroyed all social, legal, and political traditions of the country. So I would like to end with a plea to the international community to help end Myanmar's downward spiral into totalitarian terror and return it to the family of democratic nations amidst the resilience of independent media of people. Myanmar generally need to be ousted so that it can rejoin the family of democratic nations that respects human rights and democracy and the rule of law. So Myanmar needs the world attention. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Moon Myat, for sharing the situation in Myanmar. Very interesting presentation and talk today. We have a question from Dr. Bullet Kanes. Can you start with your question, and then please other participants, if you have a question and you can just talk, you don't have to type if it is not convenient for you. But first, Dr. Bullet Kanes, please.
Yes, actually, I wrote in the chat box. First of all, thank you for these informative presentations, and I hope it will continue as an engaging discussions. My question is for the Dr. Nguyen, or first presenter, first scholar. I am interested in understanding the nature of relations and interactions among these four regional countries that exhibit a form of authoritarian model, despite some differences. Could we explain authoritarianism in these regional countries within the framework of the political theory that discusses the concepts of authoritarian belt and the democratic belt? As you know, these theories suggest that any regime tends to influence neighboring countries to adopt similar regimes. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Bullen, for a very interesting and very practical question. I think it's important to think about authoritarian regimes not just unique, but they can actually become a model for other countries to follow. Actually, we are used to talking about democratic diffusion, but I think in the case of authoritarian regimes in Asia, I think we can talk about authoritarian diffusion, especially among three communist regimes in Southeast and Northeast Asia: China, Laos, and Vietnam. Because of the great power competition between China and US, people only think about Vietnam, and China as something like in a geopolitical lens. But I think Vietnam and China are two communist regimes, and they actually share many similarities. And if we follow the recent trip by Xi Jinping to Hanoi, just concluded yesterday, they have exchanged a lot of ways to maintain regime resilience among themselves, including the way to do party affairs, the way to carry out anti-corruption, and the way to surveillance and the cooperation among the country in promoting resilience between the two. And so I think there have been an attempt from China to introduce and potentially to help other countries to learn at least parts of their model, especially surveillance aspect. And secondly, from other authoritarian regimes in the region, probably Dr. Jiang from Cambodia also something here about the attempt of other authoritarian regimes in the region, including Vietnam, Cambodia, and potentially Myanmar, to learn tactics, these Beijing playbooks in maintaining regime resilience, including surveillance technology, including how to suppress civil society, and how to weaponize taxation to punish activists, and how to build ideology as a way to convince the population to follow the regime's direction. So I think there is a genuine effort from both sides to learn and to exchange their way of authoritarian resilience. And I think in addition to talk about democracy diffusion, I think we can also talk about authoritarian diffusion, especially in the case of Asian authoritarian regimes.
Thank you. Thank you for a very comprehensive answer. Any question from the audience, please? Yes, Ibrahim Ostap, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question goes to the floor, but might be addressed directly to Dr. Nguyen, who made a great presentation on Vietnam. So what I am observing nowadays is that reflecting the rising tension between China and the United States of America, global investments, American investments, European investments, Japanese investments are moving out of China into India, where we witness the rise of an authoritarian regime, or into Vietnam, as you explained, another authoritarian communist regime. So there is something unusual or contradictory here in terms of cost minimization, in terms of increasing global competitiveness, provided that those authoritarian regimes take place beside the Western club or global capitalism, their authoritarian tendencies can be tolerated. I think it has a very serious long-term oriented implication. In the rising multipolar world order, this would provide authoritarian regimes to have a very flexible field of maneuver, let me say. It will revitalize, support their authoritarian tendencies. So just I wanted to make such a comment, and if possible, get your reaction.
Yeah. Dr. Nguyễn Đức Giang or any of the speaker want to respond to that?
Well, I think I will briefly comment on that as well. I think it's very important question to ask about that. And if we look at the state of the world affairs now comparing to the Cold War, I think it's probably similar, because we also see the same tendency of capitalist liberal democracies during the Cold War. They also protected some of the most totalitarian states the world had by then. And the same thing here applies to the case of Vietnam and India, which are considered as one of the most important swing states in Asia because of their their political advantage. And so sometimes it's about real politics. It's not about ideology. When countries with different ideologies like Vietnam and India were considered as friends, so that we have the friendshoring and the de-risking approach from Western companies and from Western governments, moving manufacturing capacity from China into friendly countries like Vietnam and India. It's not about ideology, but it's mostly about, I would say, real politics. And for countries like Vietnam, I'm not in the position to talk anything about India, but for Vietnam, I think it's also about what I say, the high performing authoritarian regimes like Vietnam really need to have very strong economic growth to provide the foundation for their performance-based legitimacy. Because with our investment, with our trade with Western markets, there's no way for Vietnam to maintain a very sustainably high growth in a long period of time. So in the sense, they would prefer to have cooperation in terms of trade, investment, and economic relations with Western companies and Western partners to enhance economic growth. On the other hand, in terms of political alignment, they still want to maintain their resilience, and in a sense, they still keep very close eye with China for security concerns and for political concerns as well. Why they still, I would conclude by quoting a saying by Deng Xiaoping, the one who brought in China's market reform. He said that when we open the window, to get fresh air, we try to prevent the flies again. So, being open to Western capitals and Western investment doesn't mean that it's easy to democratize authoritarian regimes, because they keep asking for more investment, for more trade links, but they still want to maintain the resilience by trying to close down any potential risks from opening the society to too broadly to the Western actors.
Yeah, in that sense, they are very strategic and very tactical at the same time. Yeah, trying to respond to the international organization and donors' requests for democratization, but also keep very strong hold on their authoritarian regime. We have 15 minutes left, and please, any other questions or comments for the speakers?
I actually have one question for Mia, if I might. I really want to know your point of view on the recent offensive by the Brotherhood Alliance and the NUG. Do you think there will be a big, I would say big critical juncture for Myanmar in the next few years because of the recent offensive in November and October, I think? And whether what kind of support that you think that the international community should provide to the opposition, given the recent successful offensives?
I think NUG is the only hope of the people right now, and also in NUG right now. I mean, not everyone, but majority people. And we look at for 3 years, almost 3 years, and you still survive because of the support of the individual living abroad and from insides, people supporting them spiritually, also with the money as well. So that is why they can also create a good relationship with the ethnic armed groups, and they can make coordinated attacks with the other ethnic organizations as well as People Defense Forces. So right now, the international community, I think, now it's getting aware of these kind of coordinated activities of the NUG and some of the ethnic armed groups, and recognizing they have support from the people. So NUG need the legitimacy. I mean, international legitimacy. That is and they also showing kind of good performance throughout these years. So what the things NUG need is right now is legitimacy from the international community to be able to regain their power and elected by people. Yeah. And another question I saw from Dr. Beulah Nies. Can I go
Yes,
ahead.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. True, Dr. Bulan, because if you look at the international media report, I mean, I'm also one of the media professional. Media interest is always moving. They are more interested. We usually say that media is not interested if there is no killing, not many people involved in one such event. So media attention is, always moving, and they have more interested in current issue and newsy things all the time. So that's why, if you look at the previous 2 years, Myanmar news is, you cannot find Myanmar news in any international media, but in just 1 and 2 months of the coordinated attacks by the ethnic armed groups, and Myanmar become one of the headlines in international media. So that's why I said international attention also moved together with the international media news headline. That is why we need to always urge the international community not to ignore the suffering of the people from Myanmar. That's my point of this presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Nyat. I also have a question for the presenter from Dr. Yang and Dr. Wincox. So as a Vietnamese, I have witnessed that in Vietnam, the boundaries of authoritarianism and coercion has been pushed back and forth over the years, and the authority intentionally keep the boundaries unpredictable and unnavigatable, so that the people, netizens, cannot know where the current boundaries are. And in many cases, the imprisonment of people or activists or influencers are kind of a surprise to the people. So what about the situation in Cambodia and Laos, or Myanmar as well? Do the authority choose to scrutinize social media in a cherry-picking way, so that they penalize people with big audience base and influence, or do they just punish a few to scare the majority of others? I suppose that we have only 10 minutes to wrap up, but I still want to ask this question.
I can absolutely answer that, but Sophia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can do that. Thanks a lot, Dr. Khan, for the question. So I think Cambodia has some sort of unique political system that quite different from others. It's quite like you say, unpredictable, but flexible in that context as well. So as mentioned before, so electoral system has been using as the mean to achieve powers, and then election system, even though it is considered as authoritarian electoral system or electoral machines, but it is a mean that recognizing as a democratic process to ensure that. So yes, I mean, I can also address the Dr. Boland question about the democratic and also authoritarian balance as well. So Cambodia is placed within the geopolitics between what we call the democratic societies and also the non-democratic society between US and Westerns or China, something like that. Like so, a lot of discussions about this because Cambodia has played between like saying that this is Vietnam and this is Thai and also Laos as well compared to Singapore and another place. So it's a geopolitics that influence how the way the country has been developing and also navigating their issue as well. So while social media has been playing a very important role, not only how for the country leader to communicate directly with their citizen, but it also the mean that can also democratize the society as well, as mentioned before during the early period. So it seemed like the rulers underestimate how social media would play, and later on they need to tighten to control the social media by not only to shut it down, but also the process of infiltrating, like the ability to become populist on social media, so that people can see the image like that, who is the main followers on social media. But in the meantime, also scrutinize the contents, anything like that play an important role in terms of changing the mind of the people like that. So yeah, selection of different others mean has been using. It's quite flexible between what is repression, what is not to repress, in order to understand. But so the regime has some sort of ability to calculate what it's called the cost benefit analysis, a rationale between any actions like that. In the meantime, you follow what is called, because the authoritarianism tend to employ what is called legal perspective. So they said that I am doing this on the legitimate measure because it is backed by law. If you have done anything wrong, it's go against the law. That means I have a authority to do that. So I am not wrong. So we are in the democratic society, but we are following the law. If you have done anything that surpassing the law has mentioned, that means you are tend to jeopardize yourself in that context. So I think this is the key thing, that how law has been playing an important role to legitimize the ability of the rulers or the authoritarian rulers to take appropriate action against anything like that, to make sure that the regime is stabilized like that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and a short reply from I did not remember who talked before. Anyone
Phil.
want to add? Yeah.
Phil. Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, just real quick from Laos. I think you're totally right to think about the state in terms of shadowy power. In most ways predictable, but occasionally unpredictable. It is also undeniable that the Lao authorities do not have the sort of internet surveillance available to the Chinese authorities, even if they may wish to make better or stronger efforts to scrutinize what people do online. The cherry picking approach that you write in the chat, is this something the Lao authorities do to punish people with a high level of followers? As an example, absolutely. But I think we also need to keep in mind that Lao people use social media in ways that are quite different from what I see in Europe. People may have, thousands of contacts, but they may also have contacts amongst people they know who are very close to them. So there's a level here of policing one's own behavior, but also the behavior of people who are around you. Secondly, while I said that a lot of the Lao population remains illiterate or not fully literate in Lao, I am frequently struck by just how small a barrier that can be from doing certain things online. And even friends in Laos who are illiterate, manage to make video calls really efficiently and really quickly. So we have a very sort of growing digitally literate population.
All right. Thank you so much for all your engaging presentation and discussion. I think that we are running out of time, so I would like to thank you, the European Center for Populism Study, to give us this opportunity to sit down and talk together on this very interesting topic. And thank you, panelists and participants, for your presentation and questions and comments. May I invite your host for to close the session today, please.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. That was actually really interesting panelist presentations on Laos, Myanmar, and the rest. I learned a lot. And I had a lot of questions, but I have a bit of the flu, so I'm trying not to speak far too much. Dear guests, panelists, audience, thank you for your presence, participation. That was a really good session to close off the year, I believe. So again, we appreciate your time, your energy, and your insights. And the questions. Please keep in mind that in January, we do have a panel on democracy and authoritarianism in Bangladesh. We will upload the details of the panel on our website, so please make sure to look at that frequently. Please do register ahead of time if you can. That gives us an idea of how many people we have to work with, and it makes planning everything go a lot smoother. As I'm aware, that's it from the ECPS. Again, thank you to our guests, panelists, and our partners. We wish you a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, a wonderful holiday season. We'll see you all in January. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye.
Thank you, Neil,
Thank
and
you very
thank you
much.
everyone.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you everyone for having me.
Bye.
Bye.